What happens when a black college student is mistaken for a criminal, not because of evidence, but because of a hoodie and the color of his skin? This isn't just another courtroom drama. It's the true-to-life story of how a young man named Elijah Brooks was nearly erased by a justice system built to see guilt before innocence, and how one voice, a child's voice, changed everything. But don't expect a fairy tale ending. Because even when the verdict says, "not guilty," the world doesn't say, "welcome back." Stay with me as we unravel the tense, emotional, and all-too-real journey of a boy who was never supposed to walk free, and the quiet war he still wages long after the gavel drops. The courtroom was too quiet, like the breath before a storm. Dust filtered through the afternoon sunbeams that sliced across the polished oak panels, casting long shadows over the faces waiting in silence. It smelled faintly of bleach and old paper, a sterile scent that masked the weight of lives hanging in the balance. Seated at the defendant's table was Elijah Brooks, 24 years old, brown-skinned and broad-shouldered, wearing a gray suit that didn't quite fit. It belonged to his older brother, who had ironed it early that morning with care. Elijah sat still, his hands folded tightly in his lap, as if any movement might crack the fragile glass of the moment. His eyes darted occasionally to the gallery behind him, where his mother sat clutching a small Bible, her knuckles white, her lips moving in silent prayer. The charge was armed robbery. Elijah had pleaded not guilty. There were no fingerprints. No surveillance footage. No stolen items found in his possession. Just a vague witness statement from a man who admitted he'd only seen a tall black male running from the scene at dusk. But in the minds of those in power, that had been enough. Judge Raymond Kessler presided, an aging man with pale eyes and a reputation for order over justice. He had a habit of cutting off defense attorneys mid-sentence and referring to defendants by their case numbers instead of their names. People vs. 4139b, he intoned now, adjusting his glasses with fingers that trembled slightly. Let's proceed. The prosecutor, Daniel Bryce, stood tall with an easy arrogance. He was young, sharp-suited, and always made sure to smirk slightly at the jury after each sentence, like a magician waiting for applause. His tone as he addressed the jury was polished and patronizing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bryce began, "this case is simple. You will hear the testimony of a citizen who saw Mr. Brooks fleeing from a crime scene. You will review police reports that detail a history of aggression. And you will reach the only conclusion that justice demands." Elijah's public defender, Marcy Dunn, barely looked up. She was overworked, underpaid, and visibly frayed at the edges. She leaned toward Elijah and whispered, "I'll do my best," but even that sounded like an apology. From the start, things moved like a train set to a destination no one could divert. The witness, an older white man named Leonard Graves, took the stand and, with eyes narrowed, described the suspect as black, tall, in dark clothes. When asked if he could identify Elijah as the person he saw, he hesitated only briefly. "I believe that's him," Graves said, pointing with a shaky hand. The courtroom murmured. Marcy stood. "Mr. Graves, how far were you from the incident?" "Maybe 50 yards. It was getting dark." "And the person you saw, were they carrying a weapon?" "I couldn't see that." "Were there streetlights?" "Not on that side of the road." "And still, you're sure it was my client?" There was a pause, a beat too long. "I believe so," Graves repeated. Judge Kessler coughed, impatient. "Let's move along." Outside, a storm was gathering. Inside, the storm had already begun. Elijah remained silent. Not because he didn't want to speak, but because he knew from his father's lessons and his own scars that sometimes silence was the only armor a black man had in a courtroom like this. But even armor cracks under enough pressure. And as the bailiff prepared to call the next witness, a police officer with a reputation for rough arrests, the crack was coming. It was only a question of when. A low hum vibrated through the courtroom, not from sound, but from tension. The kind of pressure that made air feel heavier. The jurors shifted in their seats, fidgeting with the hems of their sleeves or avoiding each other's eyes. Somewhere in the back row, a cough echoed like a gunshot. But at the center of it all, Elijah Brooks sat unmoving, his expression blank but his mind racing. He felt every gaze on him, some curious, some suspicious, some already certain. That was the thing about being young, black, and on trial in America. The verdict started long before the gavel dropped. Judge Kessler leaned forward, his bony fingers tapping the arm of his chair. "Next witness," he barked. The bailiff called out with sharp precision, "Officer Warren Delgado." A uniformed man stepped forward with slow, measured steps, the kind that projected confidence, or power. He was in his late 40s, tan-skinned, with a frame that said he never stopped working out and a gaze that refused to soften. As he took the stand, he adjusted his belt with practiced casualness, letting the metal of his badge catch the overhead lights. The jurors' eyes followed it, like children drawn to something shiny. Delgado swore his oath, then sat. He didn't glance at Elijah. He didn't need to. His posture said it all. "Officer Delgado," Prosecutor Bryce began, "please tell the court about your interaction with Mr. Brooks on the night of October 3rd. Delgado's voice was steady, emotionless. "We received a dispatch call about a robbery in progress near Willow and 14th, description matched a male suspect, tall, black, late teens to mid-20s, dark hoodie. We canvassed the area. At approximately 8:43 p.m., I observed the defendant exiting an alleyway 3 blocks from the scene. Was he running? No. Walking briskly. Head down. Bryce paced slowly before the jury, his voice smooth. What made you approach him? His clothing matched the call. And he looked nervous. Elijah felt his jaw tighten. Nervous. As if that was a crime. Did you conduct a search? I did. No weapon found. But he had a folding pocketknife clipped to his belt, which I confiscated. Bryce nodded. And what did the defendant say when questioned? Delgado tilted his head. He said he was coming from the library. That he'd lost track of time. The prosecutor turned to the jury, smiling thinly. A library. At night. In a neighborhood known for break-ins. Whispers floated in the gallery. Marcy Dunn finally stood, her voice uncertain but clear. Officer Delgado, are you aware that the main branch library on 10th Street is open until 9 p.m.? I am now. And are you aware that Mr. Brooks was a volunteer there for 2 years? That he's on record helping with after-school tutoring? Delgado blinked. She continued. Did you ask Mr. Brooks for ID? I did. And did the address on his ID match the location he was walking toward? It did. Did he resist? Threaten? Raise his voice? No. So, to clarify, you stopped a young man walking home from the library, who matched a vague description, found no stolen property, no weapon, and no evidence, but arrested him anyway. Delgado hesitated. We had reasonable suspicion. Marcy stepped back. No further questions. Judge Kessler barely looked up. Next witness. But Elijah could feel the shift. The first tremor in the mountain. Not a landslide. Not yet. But something. Something real. He cast a glance back at the gallery. His mother's lips were still moving, quiet prayers on repeat. His little sister had arrived, too, sitting just behind her, her arms folded tightly across her chest like she was trying to hold herself together. Neither of them had cried yet. But their silence screamed. He looked away before they could catch his eyes. The prosecutor whispered something to Delgado before he stepped down. Elijah caught it, a smirk, a quick pat on the shoulder. Then came a recess. The judge rose, robes billowing like a shadow. 10-minute break. Counselors, approach. As the jury filed out, Elijah remained seated, staring straight ahead. He could hear murmurs behind him. Somewhere near the back, a man muttered, "You can just tell he did it." Elijah exhaled slowly. He wasn't surprised. He'd grown up learning how people looked at him. Like he was a warning sign instead of a person. Like his presence required an explanation. He didn't ask to grow up in a city where sidewalks cracked more than promises. He didn't ask for a world where job applications disappeared the moment they saw his name. He didn't ask to become a symbol. He just wanted to go home. Marcy leaned in. "You okay?" He didn't answer. She tried again. "I think Delgado helped us more than he thought." Elijah turned to her, voice low. "That's only true if they're listening." Marcy blinked. And for a second, something softened in her. "I am," she said. But Elijah wasn't sure that would be enough. Not in this courtroom. Not in this world. When the court reconvened, the air felt different. Thicker. The kind of thick that presses on your chest and doesn't let go. That same thickness Elijah Brooks had felt his whole life walking into department stores, onto elevators, into classrooms where he was the only one who looked like him. That thickness of being watched, judged, and already written off. The jurors shuffled back into place, eyes a little more guarded than before. As if they'd spent the break remembering what they were supposed to believe. Not what they heard, but what they'd felt when they first looked at him. He saw it in the way the woman in the blue cardigan now leaned slightly away from his side of the room. In the sideways glance from the man with the glasses, who wouldn't meet Elijah's eyes. In the way the younger juror, barely older than Elijah himself, kept clenching his jaw like he was angry just to be there. None of them smiled. None of them nodded. And one, an older white man in a starched collar, stared at Elijah like he was looking at a loaded gun. Not a person. A threat. "Next witness," Judge Kessler intoned, barely looking up from his bench. Prosecutor Bryce stood, smoothing his tie like he was preparing for a stage play. "The state calls Miss Diane Rourke to the stand." A woman in her late 60s made her way forward. Neatly dressed. Wrinkled hands. A soft lavender scarf wrapped around her neck like armor. She walked slowly, but her eyes were sharp, narrowing the moment they landed on Elijah. He knew that look. Had seen it in grocery stores, in elevators, on sidewalks. That look that said you don't belong here. That look that tried to disguise itself behind politeness but leaked distrust from every corner. "Please state your name for the record," Bryce said. "Diane Rourke." "And your relationship to this case?" "I was walking my dog along Willow Street the night of the robbery." "You witnessed something unusual?" She nodded solemnly. "Yes. I saw a man, tall, black, wearing a hood, run across the street and duck into the alley." "Are you able to identify that man here today?" Without hesitation, she raised her hand and pointed directly at Elijah. "That's him. I remember his eyes." The courtroom shifted again. Like a seesaw tipping. A few gasps. A whisper. Elijah sat frozen, his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Bryce nodded, smug. "You're sure?" "Oh yes. I know what I saw." Marcy rose. "Miss Rourke, how well lit was the street at that time?" "It was dim." "And this man you saw, he was running?" "Yes." "Wearing a hoodie?" "Yes." "Could you see his face clearly?" Rourke hesitated. "His face? Not exactly. But the shape, the way he moved. I could just tell." "I could just tell." Elijah flinched, but only slightly. That phrase. That damn phrase. It wasn't about facts. It never had been. It was about feeling. And too many people had been told to feel fear when they saw someone like him. Marcy pressed. "So just to be clear, you could not see his face?" "Not clearly, no. But you're sure it was him?" I know what I saw," she repeated, her voice a touch sharper now, defensive. The jury was listening. But they weren't questioning. Elijah felt the wave cresting. Felt the room turning cold. A small smirk tugged at the corner of Bryce's mouth. The kind that says checkmate. Marcy sat down slowly, deflated. Judge Kessler yawned audibly. Very well. Let's proceed. The prosecution had no more witnesses. It was Marcy's turn. Elijah Brooks will testify in his own defense, she said, voice shaking. The courtroom rustled again. A defendant testifying. That was rare. Risky. But Elijah had insisted. He wanted to speak. He stood. Every step he took to the witness stand felt like walking a tightrope stretched across razor wire. He sat, swore his oath, and met the eyes of the jury, not defiant, but human. Tired. Raw. Mr. Brooks, Marcy began, can you tell us where you were on the evening of October 3rd? I was at the library, Elijah said. Helping a kid named Deshaun with his math homework. I do that every week. Do you know a man named Leonard Graves? No. Did you rob the gas station on Willow Street? No. I've never even been inside that place. Why do you think you were arrested? Elijah looked straight ahead. Because I matched a description. Marcy nodded. Nothing further. Bryce approached like a shark that smelled blood. You expect us to believe that the witness misidentified you? I expect you to believe the truth. And that truth is, you just happened to be in the area. At the same time. Wearing the same clothes. Coincidence isn't guilt, Elijah replied, voice steady. At least, it's not supposed to be. Bryce chuckled, looking at the jury like they were in on the joke. You've had police encounters before, haven't you? Elijah stiffened. Marcy jumped up. Objection, irrelevant. Sustained, Kessler said, but not convincingly. Bryce stepped back, but the damage was done. The seed had been planted. Police encounters. Library kid? Or liar? The jury didn't speak. But their silence was louder than any verdict. And then it happened. The moment no one expected. The side doors creaked open. A voice called from the hallway. Wait, he's telling the truth. A boy, 12, maybe 13, rushed in. Panting. Holding a worn blue backpack. Behind him, a library staff member trailed with a flushed face and a stack of paperwork. Deshaun. Elijah blinked. The judge raised his brow. Who is this? Marcy turned, stunned. Your Honor, this is Deshaun Miller. He was being tutored by Mr. Brooks the night of the alleged crime. Judge Kessler grumbled. This isn't procedure. Bryce objected immediately. This is completely irregular. But the judge held up a hand. Let the boy speak. Deshaun stepped up to the stand. Elijah didn't rob anybody, he said, voice trembling. He was with me. The whole time. He helped me with algebra. I told the lady at the front desk. She made notes when we signed out. I didn't know he got in trouble. I had to come. He held out the sign-in sheet. Time stamped. Names written in blue ink. Eyewitness. Paper trail. Truth. The courtroom went still. Not out of respect. But shock. Judge Kessler stared. So did the jury. Elijah's eyes burned, not from tears. But from the release of breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for days. The judge leaned back. Court is adjourned until tomorrow. But the balance had already shifted. For the first time, the weight wasn't just pressing down. It was lifting. By the time the court reconvened the next morning, word had spread. Not just about the testimony. But the boy. Deshaun Miller, barely a teenager, backpack still slung over his shoulder, had broken the spell that had held the courtroom hostage for days. One voice. A child's voice. Honest. Unpolished. Unscripted. It cut through layers of practiced prejudice like a shard of light in a windowless room. But light doesn't erase shadows. It only casts them longer. Now those shadows clung to every corner of the courtroom. The jurors entered with stiff shoulders and furrowed brows. Yesterday, many of them had looked at Elijah and seen a suspect. Today, they looked confused. Uncomfortable. A few now glanced at him too long. Others not at all. And Elijah? He sat differently. Still upright. Still silent. But there was a steel in his spine now. The weight hadn't left his shoulders, it never truly would, but he'd shifted it, carried it with intention. Because now the courtroom didn't just have his word. It had the truth, witnessed, written, timed, and verified. But the truth, he knew, didn't guarantee justice. Not here. Not in this room. Judge Kessler settled in with his usual disinterest, his expression betraying more irritation than curiosity. We'll resume closing statements. Mr. Bryce. The prosecutor stood. His swagger was gone, but not his arrogance. There was a tightness in his jaw now. A man who knew the story he'd been building had sprung a leak, but he was still hoping the jury wouldn't notice the water rising. He turned to face them, gesturing with a slow, open hand. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, we've heard a lot in this courtroom. And yes, the testimony yesterday from the young boy was compelling. Emotional. But I urge you, this is a court of law, not sentiment. He started pacing. You've heard from a citizen who saw a man matching the defendant's description near the crime scene. You've heard from law enforcement officers who were acting on information in real time. You've seen the circumstantial patterns. He paused dramatically. The boy says he was with the defendant. But that doesn't prove anything. A timestamp on a sign-in sheet? Could be forged. Memory? Influenced. We live in a world of blurred lines. What matters is whether we believe the evidence presented, not the feelings it stirs. Elijah watched the jurors, watched the words sink into them like fog. He wasn't sure what scared him more, Bryce's condescension, or how familiar it felt. How many times had people looked at him, and decided their instinct overruled his reality? How many classrooms had he been in where the teacher assumed he was the troublemaker before he even opened his mouth? How many job interviews ended with, "We'll be in touch," because his name said, Elijah, but his face said, Black. This wasn't new. This was just louder. Bryce returned to his table, satisfied. And then it was Marcy's turn. The tired public defender stood slowly, her voice clear but weary. She wasn't a great speaker. But she didn't need to be. Because when she turned to Elijah and looked him in the eye, her words found the right weight. This case isn't just about robbery, she said. It's about assumptions. She turned to the jury. Ask yourselves, if Elijah had been white, in a collared shirt and khakis, walking home from a library with a backpack and a sign-in sheet, would he be here today? Or would the officer have asked him if he needed a ride? Silence. Thick. Unblinking. You heard Deshaun. You saw the timestamp. You know that the evidence wasn't just weak, it was absent. There was no video. No stolen goods. No weapon. Only descriptions, and doubts. And every time a doubt arose in this courtroom, it landed on one person's shoulders. She pointed gently. Elijah's. Another pause. This case is about more than law. It's about the lens we see each other through. You can choose to look through fear, or through fact. And if you choose the latter, there's only one verdict. She sat down. And then, stillness. Even Judge Kessler didn't speak right away. Jury will deliberate. As they filed out, Elijah's mother reached for his shoulder from the front row. No words. Just a touch. A mother's love trying to protect what the world kept trying to break. Time crawled. 20 minutes. 40. An hour. Elijah sat at the defendant's table, hands clasped so tight his knuckles ached. Marcy offered him a bottle of water, but he didn't drink. Didn't move. His thoughts were louder than the courtroom had ever been. Would they see the boy or the hoodie? The student or the statistic? The name, or the skin? And then, the door opened. The jury was back. Elijah didn't breathe. Neither did his mother. Or his sister. Or Marcy. Or Deshaun, now seated beside the library clerk who'd brought him. The foreman stood. In the matter of People versus Elijah Brooks, we the jury find the defendant. A heartbeat. A blink. A lifetime. Not guilty. The words didn't explode. They landed slowly. Like soft rain on dry earth. Elijah didn't smile. Not yet. Not there. But his mother gasped, and his sister began to sob, and Marcy closed her eyes with a sigh that shook her frame. Judge Kessler muttered something into his microphone about Elijah being free to go. But he never looked him in the eye. The courtroom emptied fast. People rushed past, more interested in lunch than justice. But Elijah sat still. For just one moment longer. Because freedom didn't feel like he thought it would. It didn't feel like celebration. It felt like survival. And survival came at a price. He rose slowly. Turned. Walked into his mother's arms. She held him like she hadn't since he was a boy. Held him like she never wanted to let go. And Elijah? He stared back at the courtroom. At the walls. The bench. The flag. He'd been proven innocent. But they had never treated him like he was presumed it. And that, he knew, was the real verdict. Elijah Brooks walked out of the courthouse not to cheers, but to wind. A cold, dry gust whipped across the marble steps of the building like it was trying to clear the stain of what had just happened inside. But stains like that don't blow away. They linger, in walls, in faces, in the worn soles of a black boy's shoes. Reporters hadn't come. No cameras. No press conference. Because there was no story in a young man being falsely accused and then found innocent. Not in this country. The headlines waited for blood, not justice. And Elijah hadn't bled. At least not in ways they could photograph. He stood on the sidewalk, the courthouse doors creaking closed behind him. His mother held his arm as if afraid someone might call him back. His sister looked up at him, eyes rimmed red, searching his face for something that looked like joy. But there wasn't any. There was relief. There was exhaustion. There was silence. "You want to go home?" his mother asked softly. Elijah stared ahead. At the city. At the cars passing, at people going about their days like the world hadn't almost swallowed him whole. "No," he said after a moment. "Not yet." He needed to walk. He needed the concrete under his feet, not the tile of a courtroom floor. He needed sky, not ceilings. Space. Breath. As he walked, the sounds of the city returned slowly, car horns, footsteps, a distant saxophone on the corner of Fifth. He passed strangers who didn't know they were passing a man who had just had his life dangled on a thread. Who didn't know how close he'd come to disappearing into a cell. How many others had. He walked until the courthouse was out of sight. Until he reached the library. It was almost poetic. The same one he had been walking from the night of the robbery, the place he went every Thursday to help kids with math and homework in quiet. He stepped inside. The clerk looked up and froze. Then smiled, wide and watery-eyed. "They told me. I saw the news online. You okay?" He nodded. Yeah. I think so. Deshaun was there too, seated in the corner, pretending to do algebra but clearly distracted. He looked up. Elijah. And in that word, his name, was something no courtroom had given him, belief. The boy ran to him, hesitated, then hugged him without asking. Elijah froze, caught off guard, then gently returned the embrace. You saved me, he whispered. They weren't gonna believe me. You saved me, Elijah replied, kneeling to eye level. Don't forget that. Deshaun's lip trembled. They said you looked like the guy. I know. But you didn't. I mean, you looked like you. That sentence broke something open in Elijah. Because that's what it always came down to, didn't it? Looking like him. Looking like a possibility. Looking like a problem. They hadn't seen Elijah. They'd seen a hoodie. A height. A hue. They'd seen a version of fear someone else had sold them. He stood and ruffled the boy's hair. Keep doing your homework. Deshaun grinned and ran back to his table. Elijah turned to leave, but before he did, the librarian reached behind the desk and handed him something. His volunteer badge. Still clipped to the logbook. I held on to it, she said. Didn't feel right throwing it away. He took it in both hands. The laminated plastic felt heavier than it should have. Thanks, he murmured. That night, back at home, Elijah couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the courtroom still clinging to his ribs. He thought about Diane Rourke, the woman who pointed at him, eyes cold with certainty built on nothing. He thought about Officer Delgado, about the smirk he wore as he cuffed a college student with a library card. He thought about the jury, the way their eyes had shifted after Deshaun spoke. Not before. He thought about Judge Kessler, who never said his name. And he thought about all the men who didn't get a boy bursting through courtroom doors at the last minute. Who got lost in the system. Who were still behind bars. The next morning, he rose early. He dressed quietly and walked to the neighborhood recreation center. He'd passed it 100 times, never stepped inside. But that day, he asked about starting a program. Tutoring. Workshops. Mentorship. A space where black boys could come and be seen. Not as threats. Not as suspects. But as children. The director, an older man with wise eyes and a long memory, stared at him for a long moment. You're not the first to try something like that, he said. I won't be the last either, Elijah replied. They shook hands. A week later, the first session began. 3 boys showed up. Then 7. Then more. Elijah never spoke about the courtroom. Not at first. But when he did, the boys listened like it was scripture. Because they already knew. They'd seen the looks. Felt the shifts in energy when they walked into rooms. They knew how thin the line was between here and there. He told them the truth. All of it. And then he told them something more. You don't need to prove your humanity. You were born with it. It didn't fix everything. The world was still heavy. The system still cracked and cruel. But in that little room, under flickering lights and cheap folding chairs, something grew. Not justice. But maybe its seed. And Elijah Brooks, once almost forgotten by a courtroom, became impossible to ignore. Because he remembered. And the memory didn't leave. Elijah's story isn't just his. It's every kid who's ever been profiled, every family who's ever waited for justice, and every name the system tried to bury in silence. He walked out of that courtroom, but the scars didn't stay behind. So here's the question I want you to answer in the comments. Do you think justice was really served? Was freedom enough? Or did the system still win? Let's talk about it. Drop your thoughts below. And if this story made you feel something, anything, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Because I've got more real stories that this world needs to hear. Your voice matters. Let's use it.